Hello, you're watching Telecom TV. We are at the Internet of Retail event in Gerrards Cross in the London suburbs, really, stockbroker belt, and I'm talking with Thoryn Stephens, who is the Chief Digital Officer with American Apparel. Thoryn, good to meet you and thanks for talking to us.
Definitely, thank you, Martin.
American Apparel already has a pretty well-known name. Tell us about it. What do you do?
Sure. So we are the largest apparel producer in North America. We have over 200 stores globally.
And what I think is your USP, as it were, your unique selling proposition is It is American Apparel. Because
Absolutely.
It's not from China or Portugal, or it's
Everything,
all made in the States.
Everything is handcrafted in the United States, most of which is made in our downtown facility in Los Angeles.
Let's talk, you're a technologist, I believe. We'll come on to that in due course. But let's talk before that about what you think the Internet of Things is having on the retail industry right now.
Yeah, most definitely. So one of my major focuses has been in the omnichannel marketing and fulfillment side of the business. So really defining what is omnichannel to American Apparel. There's three specific areas: buying online, picking up in store, for instance, the in-store experience. So when the consumer is actually in the store, their ability to actually purchase a product from one of our sales rep that has an iPad and so forth. And then also the ship from retail experience, so they can basically buy online and it'll ship from a retail store to reach them more quickly, essentially. And really what we're seeing, I'd say, from a very high level is kind of the blending of user experience between retail and digital. So much so that I think in the future, from a order attribution perspective, orders will be attributed both to retail and to digital. And a quick example there is you could have a consumer walking down the street, they will trip a geofence and have a tailored push notification that drives them into the store. Then we may use a proximity beacon essentially to drive a recommendation, at which time they would then go to the counter and purchase, maybe entirely through their phone using Apple Pay, and ultimately walk out the door. And so the question I would have is, where does that order attribute to? Is that to retail or digital? And I think in the end it's both. And I see that as a major challenge that we're ultimately working to resolve, is how do you blend those two experiences and then ultimately attribute the order and revenue accordingly.
Driving this, all of it, obviously, Thoryn, is data.
Absolutely.
And you're collecting data from the devices that you've just been talking about. You're tripping this. Everybody's on tablets or whatever, collecting the orders and everything else. You collect that data and you slice it and dice it, and it's fairly obviously what you, as American Apparel, get from that. What does your customer get? A guy who's buying a pair of jeans or whatever it might be.
Yeah, the customer gets a personalized experience that's tailored to that individual. I mean, that is really the goal and the objective. And they also may receive some sort of a reward, whether it be based on loyalty or a discount, that further extends the value proposition, I would say. So I think the personalization is absolutely key and crucial.
Now, you have obviously a strategy for the Internet of Retail, the Internet of Things. How do you formulate it, given what you've just been talking about? So you're trying to meld these two into an omnichannel. You're trying to meld the physical experience of going to the shop and the online experience. How do you form your strategy for the Internet of Retail around that?
Sure. So I always try to frame strategy around a position of value, and what value can we actually drive to our consumers, and how can we enrich their experience. And that experience could be both online, it could be on their mobile device, or of course it could be within the store. So really understanding how can we provide value in terms of, again, personalization or their ability to interact with the products. A quick example is we're experimenting right now with RFID tags that are actually in all of our merchandise, where the consumer can basically take their app and they can scan or use essentially a touch using Apple Passbook as an example, and get product information on their phone immediately. If they have questions around the product, you can look at the descriptions, the size, the inventory availability, press a button, and ultimately purchase the product and be on their way. So really focusing on value, ease of use, and being very customer-centric in that approach.
So customer centricity obviously drives value to you and value to the consumer. What about the brand itself? How important in all this mix is the American Apparel brand?
Absolutely. I think it's the foundation in my mind. So it's being customer-centric and I think that from two perspectives. One is, what is the value of your customers, and specifically you have your high value customers, your medium, and your low, but what can you learn about each of those segments of consumers, and how can you tailor the experience to be more enriching so you're driving your mid-value consumers to be high value? So what can you learn from your high value consumers and how they interact with the brand, how they interact with the stores, how they interact with your digital experience, and ultimately continuing to drive value up the food chain, so to speak.
Fine, that's the plus side. Let's talk about any potential or real pitfalls.
Sure.
What are they? Have you seen many? Are you aware of what can go wrong, as it were, or traps you can fall into?
I think what keeps me up at night is privacy and authentication, and ensuring that the data is always, I would say, in a stable environment where ultimately it can't be hacked or, worse, be leaked, out to the general public. So privacy is absolutely one of the paramount concerns.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on. And then when we started the interview, we said you're a technologist.
Sure.
Let's talk about technology. So tell me about your technological background.
Yeah.
You're deeply involved in technology.
Absolutely. So my background's actually in molecular biology, but
Wow.
I've been building technology platforms for the mainstay of my career. I got my first Google Analytics account in 2002, and in my current role as Chief Digital Officer at American Apparel, I manage acquisition, conversion, retention, but also the technology team and backbone. So I have a group of engineers, front-end, back-end, solution architect, that basically help maintain the architecture and framework for the e-commerce engine, and then taking it a step further, the experience within the store, where we partner closely with the IT organization.
Interesting, and you're the Chief Digital Officer. There's a point being made there, is there not? You're not the CIO.
Right.
You're the Chief Digital Officer. What does that mean to American Apparel?
Sure.
What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think it was voted the sexiest title of the year, last year. So, in my mind, it's kind of it's the merging of business and technology and data, maybe analytics and so forth. And it's the ability to, really drive the technology to actually drive value to the consumer, but to have it very much in line with the analytics as well. And I look at the two as being very much integral. And an example is omnichannel, and so I'm the omnichannel champion at the organization across the different programs that I mentioned earlier.
Thanks. One of the things you hear mentioned more and more, and you know this as well as I do, people talk about ecosystems all
Sure.
the time. Now, it's appeared over the past few years, but it's now everywhere. Okay, everything's an ecosystem.
Yep.
I suppose it is, really. But what about in the Internet of Retail? What do you think the Internet of Retail ecosystems looks like? How does it work?
Yeah, so in my mind, you have the ecosystem of the consumer, and then you have the ecosystem of the store.
Yeah.
And so the ecosystem of the consumer could be some sort of mobile device that they're actually holding, in their hands, and the interaction of that with beacons or within the in-store experience, and ultimately the back end, what that could look like. And as I mentioned earlier, working on a project with a company called SmartTrack that allows us to basically look at our real-time inventory levels using RFID. And so, that would be a back-end ecosystem that's interacting with the store ecosystem that's ultimately interacting with the consumer.
And what about the technology that you use? You mentioned quite a handful,
Sure.
Thoryn. Where do you get them from? Do you source it from traditional service providers, the likes of Verizon or AT&T or something like that? Or do you lease, or do you buy packaged solutions from systems integrators? Do you build it yourself? Or do you go to, it sounds as though you go to retail sector-specific vendors as well? Or is it a melange of the whole lot?
I'd say it's probably, to use your word, a melange of a little bit of each. I've been the most successful working with very, I would say, nimble vendors that maybe fulfill one specific purpose and really maximizing the value there. That's been my overarching strategy.
And these people who become your partners, whom you collaborate with, one of the things, my background's telecommunications.
Sure.
So, in the past, we now see people partnering and friends with and collaborating, when in the past they've been stabbing each other to death.
Sure.
That's changed to that extent. Your partnerships with your suppliers, not necessarily of the clothing or anything like making that, but is that an ongoing relationship you have with them, or is it stop and start?
I would say it's generally ongoing. We have some very, very strong partners that we are ultimately looking to take our business from X and bring it to Y, and we've been very fortunate to align with, I think, really good technology that will help us get there. And the flip side is they're seeing the value in us as a global brand with, a global footprint, and they have great technology that they would like ultimately to, socialize to greater areas such as the United States.
Last question to you then, Thoryn.
Sure.
The role of the traditional network operator, the likes for you in the States of Verizon and AT&T,
Okay.
for example. They've got huge networks. They're spending a lot of money on modernising, virtualising them, SDN, NFV, the cloud, the whole 9 yards,
Sure.
as you say. They've got a lot of expertise also in IoT for all sorts of reasons, going back historically from the remote reading of gauges and everything else. So they've got that expertise. But I talk to a lot of people in this area, and some say, yeah, the traditional carriers have got a real role in this, and they say, well, we're not really sure whether they do because we're afraid of being locked into them. If we go with AT&T or Verizon or whoever, and we start to buy from them and we get ourselves involved with them, are they going to lock us in forever? What's your take on that?
I don't really have a strong opinion, to be honest. As I mentioned, tend to go with the smaller companies, but in terms of the carriers or providers, I'm not really.
You're not bothered?
A bit indifferent.
Okay, well, good one to end on. Thoryn Stephens, thank you very much indeed.
Great. Thank you much, Martin.
Thanks.
Take care.
Cheers.